When the Interior Ministry sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're not sending you. They're not sending you. They're sending people that have lots of problems. And they're bringing those problems with us. They're bringing drugs. They're bringing crime. They're grapists. And some, I assume, are good. I'm sorry, I meant to say they're good.
Genichiro, you must save Isshin.
You know what? It's impossible to do this on our own. I'm gonna need the blood of my ancestors. Give me the black mortal blade.
Genichiro did nothing wrong.
A Sekiro video essay. Genichiro's the villain, and yet so many people sympathize with him.
Am I the only one that feels bad for Genichiro?
Like they seem to do in so much media these days. The villain speaks to our worst desires, our worst impulses, our ids, if I can use the Freudian term. We love to see them on screen. We root for them in some small way, and yet, in the end, we still want a happy ending. They can be cool and charismatic and maybe even voice ideological disputes within the system, contradictions within our liberal societies, contradictions within this liberal world order that's dominated since the collapse of the Soviet Union. But they need to lose. Every scene that Heath Ledger's Joker is in The Dark Knight is arguably the best scene. Do you really care about what Alfred is saying? Probably a little bit. The story in that movie is good, so everything adds onto everything else. But on a first watch, aren't you just waiting to see the Joker make an appearance again? What's it gonna do this time? Whose plans is it gonna fuck up? And yet, like I said, would the movie still be satisfactory if, instead of poignantly running off into the dark like our watchful protector, Batman instead caught a slug to the face? No. Despite being the more boring of the two, we need Batman to win. This was addressed in One Punch Man Season 2, an underrated season. Garou is effectively a foil to Satayama, and one of his main observations is how the villain is always outnumbered. You see this all the time. In the Avengers, Thanos effectively has a giant trash mob backing him up, while he faces off against a super squadron of heroes, who all have main character syndrome because they were, in fact, the main character in their respective films. Mindless, unthinking henchmen are all a villain can ever get the fall of them. And yet aren't their ideas more intriguing? If not intriguing, perhaps challenging? In contrast, the heroes never have any ideas at all besides protecting the status quo. Like cops or soldiers who are just following orders. Whose orders? Whose values? They don't think to question that. Vaguely helping people is enough. The villain offers critique and they must lose, because what makes them a villain is some morally offensive action. In the hokey screenwriting book Save the Cat, it suggests that you should have your main character do something obnoxiously nice to win over the audience's affection, like saving a cat out of a tree. So to make a villain, you do the inverse. Throw a dog into a wood chipper, or 1,000 dogs. So the villain often does what they do at scale. Maybe stab a little boy in the stomach, and now the well has been poisoned. Regardless of what they stand for, they need some karmic retribution. This is what critiquing the system leads to. Isn't this the real underlying message of every fictional story that has a hero and has a villain? Critique of liberalism leads to evil. Sekiro's no different. When we first meet Genichiro, he cuts our arm off, and this happens whether we win or we lose. So already our takeaway is that this is a man without honor, a man who cheats to get his way. Genichiro points out our hypocrisy. He notes that we're a shinobi, and shinobis win by any means necessary. After all, the word shinobi is just another way of saying ninja. And while ninjas might have a good reputation in Western media, meaning that they have a cool factor, or there's a lot of main characters you can play as that are ninjas, the reality of them was a lot closer to how they were portrayed in a movie like The Last Samurai, which means they don't engage in honorable duels, but are much more likely to attack from the shadows with a poisoned arrow. And that's mostly how you attack in the game, through stealth. And you're incentivized to use this as much as possible. It results in the instant death of trash mobs, and you're not exactly equipped to fight more than one person at a time. In about a video game logic common to From Software's titles, attacks clip through characters and hit you. So why not just insta-kill these idiots? It makes sense. But just to be clear, you aren't merely killing them. You're committing murder, by any reasonable definition of the term. Sneaking up behind someone and plunging a sword through their neck, while perhaps satisfying, could never be justified as an act in self-defense. A soldier could justify it so long as he was doing it to another enemy combatant, but you aren't a soldier. In fact, the game makes every effort to show Sekiro's neutrality to the war going on around him. Already we're approaching a very crucial point, the difference between the morality of actions in a cutscene and the morality of actions in gameplay. Cutscenes are considered canon. If you see it in a cutscene, you're sure on an instinctual level the event occurred in the story, even if it's a dream sequence, even if it's a game with multiple endings. In the latter case, fans debate which ending was correct, and even if an ending isn't considered canon, it's still heavily considered when evaluating the character's morality and overall likability. Cutscenes matter to your perception of who these characters are. Gameplay is perceived as an ambiguous fog. Maybe it happened that way, maybe it didn't. Although, I think this can be a bit of a cop-out. Most games have an intended experience, and most players emerge from the simulated reality having performed largely the same actions, albeit in a slightly different way. Yoko Taro addressed this point in Nier Automata. He wasn't the first to do it, he's just one of the most recent and notable examples. Usually players mindlessly run through video games, killing everything in sight. The enemies are just NPCs being used as obstacles, no different than random floating surfaces in the sky in a platforming game. Do you feel anything more jumping on the head of a Goomba than you do ripping a demon in half in Doom? Perhaps there's a bit more bloodlust, it's a bit more metal, but whatever more you do feel is fleeting because there's a constant barrage of enemies. There's no time to reflect on what you've done, and that's fine. It's harmless fun, but it's also a bit odd when developers attempt to engage your emotions in the cutscenes that follow. A bad guy commits murder in a cutscene. They want you to feel aghast that you just massacred 500 people in the level leading up to this moment. In Nier, Taro would have you commit such a massacre, and then the cutscene that followed question whether these mindless NPCs and enemies you just killed were really so mindless after all. In Sekiro, you and Genichiro are after the same thing, a little boy with blood that makes people immortal. His name is Kuro. In a flashback, we see Kuro gave his blood to you already. This allows you to wake up after dying. Get it? Shadows die twice, it's in the title. Of course, you eventually get a third red dot, but regardless, when you run out of them, you face what's called a true death. And a true death carries a harsh punishment. You lose half your money and half your experience collected for your next experience point. But interestingly, this also has an effect on the world, which is what we're going to focus on here. Die enough times, the NPCs you interact with, the merchants, the story-oriented characters, start to cough up phlegm and aren't able to speak with you any longer. This is called dragon rot, and it's a sickness, and the vast majority of players most likely find it a major annoyance, a gimmick to make the game extra hard. In Souls games, the worse your punishment after dying or losing, the more anxiety the average player feels during tense moments in boss fights. This is how long runbacks in the older Souls games rationalize. They made your palms a little extra sweaty, but dragon rot is much more integral to the story than this. The story logic, as it stands, would not work without its inclusion. Dragon rot is the primary motivation for why Kuro won't give his blood to Genichiro. There's a civil war brewing in the background of Sekiro. A central government called the Interior Ministry is attempting to wrestle control of a breakaway faction called Ashina. Genichiro is in charge of this little statelet and is staring down the face of an invasion from a force that's clearly superior to his own. The game portrays Kuro's refusal to grant Genichiro immortality as a principled stance against stagnation, yet this view fails to acknowledge the harsh realities of statecraft. As a child, Kuro remains insulated from the brutal necessities of governance and survival. Genichiro sees the dragon's heritage in Kuro's blood as a critical resource for preserving Ashina's people and culture, a necessary sacrifice, similar to extreme measures real-world leaders might take during existential crises. Any state leader facing invasion would likely use such a powerful resource to save their nation without hesitation, potentially sacrificing many lives for collective survival. The notion that a leader would choose differently seems naively idealistic. The game's framing of Kuro's decision as morally superior and Genichiro's forcible action as monstrous overlooks the rational calculus behind such difficult choices. After all, what alternative does Genichiro have? A question we'll return to frequently. Leaders throughout history have made devastating decisions, including declarations of war, knowing the suffering that would result, yet believing them necessary for their people's survival. The game's moral critique of Genichiro fundamentally misses this pragmatic reality of leadership. In Sekiro, immortality carries distinct meanings. Kuro sees it as a personal curse, a disease he must eliminate. Genichiro treats treats it as a tool, a weapon to secure power. The game reinforces this split through the rejuvenating waters, which corrupt and spawn mist nobles, a parasitic elderly class that drains the youth via enfeeblement, while comically offering the highest rewards in new game farming through their deep pockets. Immortality emerges as a destructive force, unnaturally halting life and spreading decay through dragon rot, a clear penalty for disrupting cosmic order. This echoes a familiar fictional trope, immortality as a moral negative. It also hints at an ideological progressive critique of tradition, casting ancestors as oppressive relics, trying to control you from beyond the grave, only amplified here, as these ones simply refuse to die at all. Both Kuro and Wolf lean toward breaking cycles. Kuro's push to end the dragon's heritage reads as a rejection of his lineage, an attempt to escape its weight. Wolf breaks free from his blind obedience to the Iron Code and patriarchal authority by rejecting Father Owl's control. Wolf's final realization, the code must be determined by the individual, marks a decisive shift away from inherited cycles and inheritance itself, a realization with Western and liberal roots, which we'll discuss in a moment. Wolf and Genichiro emerge as compelling narrative counterpoints, both orphaned by war. Their paths are defined by an unflinching willingness to kill and a ruthless pursuit of their objectives, though ironically, Wolf proves the more prolific killer. The game stages 3 pivotal encounters with Genichiro, each serving as a skill check that solidifies him as Wolf's true rival, though by the 3rd encounter, the tables have turned completely, and you're skill checking him. Their weapons symbolize their opposing philosophies. Wolf wields the Crimson Mortal Blade, capable of severing immortality, where Genichiro brandishes the Black Mortal Blade, used to resurrect the dead. Where Wolf seeks to cut away the past, Genichiro desperately attempts to revive his ancestral legacy and arrest Ashina's decline. Their deeper connection lies in their uncompromising determination and the tragic circumstances that transform them from vulnerable children into instruments of violence. However, the contrast between Isshin and Genichiro better strikes at Sekiro's thematic core. Both men ultimately fall by Wolf's blade, but their paths to that moment reveal fundamentally different approaches to confronting certain defeat. The game takes a very explicit stance and sides with Isshin's approach, which they present as wizened, dignified, wholesome Chungus. Genichiro, in contrast, rages against the dying of the light, willing to sacrifice everything including his humanity. But when annihilation is certain, are we sure it isn't Genichiro's reaction that constitutes a more honorable, meaningful resistance? A warrior's fatalism defines Isshin, manifesting most clearly in his final words during the Shura ending, "Sekiro, it was not meant to be." His acceptance of death's inevitability paradoxically becomes a source of strength. By viewing death as an abstract future event, he finds freedom in the present moment. In its own way, this becomes a psychological and spiritual version of immortality that allows him to face combat without fear, knowing his end will come only at its appointed time. Yet in a world where true immortality exists, Isshin's deliberate rejection of it becomes striking. He speaks of the immortal monks at Senpou Temple with unveiled contempt, calling them degenerates. The very notion of defying death's natural order seems to disgust him. While he concerns himself with his legacy, the fate of his clan after death holds no interest. It lies beyond the boundaries of his control, and he accepts this with characteristic stoicism. But is this choice noble, or is it selfish? Isn't he just saying, I don't care what happens after I die, because I won't be around to see it? When you first encounter Isshin in the Ashina outskirts, it's under false pretenses. He wears a mask and introduces himself as Tengu. As you walk to this meeting, dead bodies of the Interior Ministry trusted assassins rot in the snow. Depending on your exploration, you might not fully grasp their level of expertise, but this foreshadowing demonstrates Isshin's true power and why he's the final boss of the game, hidden in plain sight. He speaks of rats who have invaded the castle walls, by which he means spies, and offers you a reward if you eliminate them. At this moment, it might be unclear to you whether he's testing you or playing a much deeper game, or you might not notice anything suspicious about him at all. But even before you formally meet, Isshin has been subtly shaping events to help you thwart Genichiro's plans and save Kuro. In the cutscene that precedes your first moment of gameplay, when a note drops in your prison cell from Emma, who's your prototypical Souls girl this time around, it was Isshin who told her to do this. Have you ever wondered why? Let's consider all the ways this is logically preposterous. Surely Isshin is stronger than Genichiro and could win in a direct confrontation. You might think his reluctance to act is tied to Genichiro being his adopted grandson, but by pushing you into the conflict as his pawn, Isshin has essentially hired an assassin to kill his grandson instead. Isn't this even more perverse? After all, Wolf ends up killing his own foster father, so it's not unthinkable that Isshin could take a similar approach, just in reverse with the generational roles swapped. What's more, Isshin still commands more authority than Genichiro while he's alive, so why does he choose to undermine it from behind the scenes? Finally, what does Isshin prefer Genichiro do instead of use Kuro's blood? god? Just accept that he's too weak to prevail and watch his homeland be destroyed? Be a cuck and lose with honor? Genichiro emerges as the narrative's most captivating figure. So much so that I often imagine an alternate game told from his perspective. This isn't a criticism of Sekiro's gameplay, which remains nearly flawless, but a testament to Genichiro's narrative depth. His doomed struggle against insurmountable odds, driven by a cause larger than himself, I find personally inherently gripping. How did he acquire the Black Mortal Blade? Did he have to venture into the depths of hell? In any case, to truly understand Genichiro and the embedded messages within the game at tension with themselves, we're gonna have to take a closer look at the metapolitical landscape of Sekiro. One of my favorite moments in the game hits right after you defeat the corrupted monk. You've earned the ability to swim, snagged some prayer beads, and fended off those oddly aggressive fish. Now what? If you use the sculptor's idol, you're whisked away to the abandoned dungeon entrance, where Ashina's invasion first rears its head. Fast travel's locked inside the castle, so there's only one way forward, a bridge you've crossed a dozen times. Sekiro excels at this, reusing familiar spaces to reflect the shift in the world state. When you arrive, something's off. A familiar trash mob flails towards you in terror. He's abandoned his post, tucks himself in a ball, cowers in fear, whimpering. What's he running from? A demon? A ghost? No, it's the Red Guard. This guy strides in, all menace, dual kodachis gleaming. He's the only enemy in the game who weaponizes his intimidation. His bright red uniform is reminiscent of blood and seems to suggest soon it'll be covered in yours. His attacks mix fast slashes with slow, unpredictable feints designed to rattle you. In short, he's got aura. You can flee, he's not fast enough to chase you, but the game nudges you to act. Does it want you to protect the terrified soldier, or does it want you to punish his cowardice? I can't decide. After you beat the Red Guard, the soldier stays down, broken, sniveling, never aggroes. You can finish him off for a pittance of XP and gold, or walk away. I leave him, because unlike Wolf, I'm not neutral. I'm Team Ashina. I'd love to dive into this war and turn the tide, but Sekiro doesn't let you. Change is coming, and it's unstoppable. The world itself reflects this. Look at Ashina's defenses. Straw-clad soldiers, flimsy barricades, beasts they can't control. A chained ogre, untrue to his name, doesn't stay chained for very long. The blazing bull comes bursting out of his cage, unprovoked, and stomps the guards in front of him before he attempts to stomp you. Everywhere you look, it's chaos. The Ashina troops scream and scatter. Whenever they do fight, the Interior Ministry wins almost every time. Just watch without stepping in, it's a slaughter. Genichiro's framed as a classic reactionary, clinging to a dying world, but is he really from the Sengoku era? Or does his spirit echo Imperial Japan, a time of rising militarism and nationalism, now 80 years gone, still parasitically shaping the Japanese soul? Japan had a martial culture prior to the war for their entire history, and ever since they've been demilitarized. To this day, that continued. Ashina must be preserved, Genichiro growls if you lose to him in the second boss fight. Wolf, on the other hand, follows a different path. Bound by the Iron Code and his corrupt foster father, his penultimate realization that defines his character arc. The code must be determined by the individual. His arc, then, is breaking free from tradition, patriarchal authority, and collectivism. So in order to understand what this has to do with liberalism, let's look at how liberalism has evolved into its modern form. Liberalism itself has changed, passing from the level of ideas, political programs, and declarations to the level of reality, penetrating the very flesh of the social fabric, which became suffused with liberalism, and, in turn, it began to seem like the natural order of things. Politics became biopolitical, moving to the individual and sub-individual level. Liberalism has permeated all layers of social life, influencing not only political institutions and laws, but also cultural output, social relations, and even personal subjectivity. It's no longer a matter of political elites or intellectuals debating liberalism's merits. It has become a natural part of the way people think, act, and relate to one another. It's just the way things are. Liberalism is no longer an ideological project, but it's become hegemonic in the sense that it's difficult to imagine an alternative without describing it as evil, or articulating even where the boundaries of liberalism end and reality begins. The liberal tradition sees human beings as atomistic entities, self-contained units, responsible for their own success or failure. Traditionally, the ideology considered them best governed by minimal state intervention and maximum market freedom. However, this has become more insular, and now the individual is abstracted from their physical attributes, or in other words, their body itself, to justify the mantra that underneath our skin we're all the same. In contrast, Japan's collectivism collectivist ethos, emphasizes the interconnectedness of individuals within a larger social hierarchy. Here, personal identity is deeply intertwined with community and family ties, making it harder to distinguish between self-interest and collective responsibility. This is what Sekiro is critiquing. Though From Software or Miyazaki himself likely never intended Sekiro to deliver such a message, it's embedded within the game nonetheless, because liberalism is embedded within us, festering beyond our own awareness. Sekiro reflects the tension between individualism and collectivism, between the inevitable collapse of the old world and the justification for embracing the new and accepting progress. More than anything, it's not about history at all, but about the present, a rationalization for maintaining modern Japan as it is, and not sliding back to those forces that turned into a monstrosity 80 years ago, which Genichiro represents. Body horror is often used to externalize internal struggles, making the invisible, fear, power, identity, visible through flesh. In the film The Thing, the transformations are intimate and secretive, reflecting betrayal and doubt. In Akira, they're explosive and public, embodying chaos and rebellion. The physicality of these changes, bones cracking, skin stretching, organs twisting, ground abstract concepts in something uncomfortably real, forcing the audience to feel the theme rather than just intellectualize them. So what about in Sekiro? I've never seen the entire meaning of a game better embodied in a single striking image. The body horror is meant to symbolize how duty can consume and destroy the self, amplifying the game's critique of blind loyalty. The neck severing is especially potent. It's a symbolic beheading of Genichiro's autonomy, his head, his individual will, sacrificed to let the body, the collective legacy, serve as a gateway. Isshin doesn't return as a spirit, but as a physical being, born from his grandson's corpse. It's a perverse inversion of birth where life emerges not from the womb, but from death and mutilation. Genichiro sees himself as a vessel for Ashina's past glory, and his body becomes that vessel in the most literal sense. The neck, often a symbol of vulnerability or connection, head to body, mind to action, being severed and repurposed heightens the horror, while underscoring how the past consumes the present. Isshin in his prime represents Ashina's peak, but his violent birth from Genichiro shows that clinging to that legacy destroys the living. It's a dark reflection of Sekiro's own journey to sever ties, like with Kuro, rather than perpetuate cycles of sacrifice. Isshin crawling out of Genichiro's neck evokes a birth gone wrong. Heritage isn't passed down gently, but violently extracted, leaving the living generation hollowed out. Yet despite this, the grotesque imagery becomes a testament to Genichiro's resolve. He doesn't flinch as he cuts, doesn't hesitate as his life spills out. The horror isn't in his loss, but in the sheer physicality of his dedication. His body torn apart, not by defeat, but by choice. Isshin calling it pitiful reflects the game's bias towards Kuro's severance, but in my view, this elevates Genichiro as a tragic hero, his flesh a battlefield for collective duty. Is Genichiro a victim of a parasitic past, as Isshin's tone and Kuro's arc suggests? Or is he a martyr, his grotesque sacrifice a defiant stand against deracination? The wet crunch of his neck, the sight of Isshin pulling free, lingers as a question mark, nobility or futility. I guess whether you agree with my take depends on how you feel about modern Japan itself. Do they need to constantly be reminded of their defeat and humiliation 80 years ago, stripped of their military and sovereignty until the end of time? Or do they need to remember who they were before? Hundreds or even thousands of years of their ancestors' blood still flows within them, a genetic memory locked in a cage, a monstrosity waiting to escape. Do we have some obligation to keep it hidden away, or is it finally time to let it out?